Good morning. I call to order the June 16th, 2022 regular meeting of the Oak Island Planning Board. Note that we do have a quorum. Two members absent at the present time, Michael Brown and Bob Callahan, but we have 5 folks here, so we're good to go. If you would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is adjustment approval of the agenda, and I would like to take something of a point of privilege and ask that we add one item to new business, which is discussion of Section 727, dwelling single family large. Are there any other adjustments to the agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
I'll make the motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you. Approval of the minutes. We do have minutes from our last meeting on May the 19th. Anybody have any changes to the minutes or any questions?
I had one item, and if nobody else remembers it, just step back. But when we were talking about some alternatives on the fence size and so on, at the end of that conversation, I asked the applicants point blank if they were willing to slightly change their application per some of the suggestions, or if not. And they said no, they were all in. And for some reason, you didn't pick that up.
Okay.
Normally, I wouldn't worry about it, but I thought it was significant.
Significant. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be glad to listen to it again, and
Okay.
that would be a
It
significant
was in
change.
one of those last 3 paragraphs.
Okay. And that would be a significant change, I would think, a content change, so I'll be glad to bring it back next month.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Everybody okay with that? All right. Thank you, Lee. Before we get to public comment, we do have a new full-time planner. His name is Matt Kirkland, and Matt, I'd just like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to everybody and say what you will.
Sure. It's great to meet everybody. Really excited to be here. As you just said, my name's Matt Kirkland. I'm a North Carolina native. Lived here my whole life. Grew up in a small town, not too different from Oak Island as far as full-time population, about 10,000 people, Tarboro, North Carolina. Anybody's familiar with it? Cut my teeth planning in Johnston County for a few years before moving to the Wilmington area and working in Leland as the senior planner there. Just started here on the 31st of May, so it's been a fun couple of weeks getting acclimated to everything. We've got a lot of work to do as a town, especially in the planning realm, in my opinion, so I'm really looking forward to digging in and doing some of that work with this board. So if you ever need anything, I'm happy to help. Reach out to me. We'll see what we can do if there's an issue, okay?
Thank you, Matt. We're glad to have you, and we look forward to working with you and expecting lots of good things.
We got a lot to do.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Okay. Next on the agenda is public comment. Anyone would like to speak to us? We do have a couple of people that aren't applicants out there, I think. I see no. Okay.
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
this would be the time. But ma'am, if you'll come to the podium, though, so
Just
they'll
come to
be
the
on the
podium,
record. Thank you.
come to the podium, give us your name and address and whatever you'd like to say to us this morning.
Carolina Candelaria, 301 Northeast 42nd Street. And I've lived here for about 25 years. And I just wanted to say thank you to Dara and Lee and Mr. Bob. And I don't know all of your names, but you are doing a very nice job. And I appreciate what you're trying to do to preserve the canopy. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You can come and say that every month if you want to. Okay. All right. So next item on the agenda is old business, discussion of, yet again, Chapter 32, vegetation. This comes to us from, we started the discussion last month. From an email that we got from a citizen that had been sent to council, and we were encouraged to review that and see what might come of it. And so, Matt, I'll let you just introduce what you have provided for us here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So, not being at the last meeting, I did take the time to watch it and watch some of that discussion. It seemed like there was a kind of a broad range discussion about a lot of different potential changes that could be made. But it seemed like, from my impression, that there was still some things that you wanted to hash out. So what staff did was pull some examples from local jurisdictions, and I'll cover those, why we pulled those and what they illustrate. Then we also pulled some language from the American Planning Association best practices for you to chew on as you consider potential changes to this ordinance. And then finally, some adopted plan consideration. I believe it's important to consult our land use plans whenever we make a decision, whether it's in the UDO or not, especially when it involves any type of development. So I'll briefly go through some of that information. You have it in front of you, so I won't belabor it and read it verbatim. But the first jurisdiction we pulled was Topsail Beach. Topsail Beach has a maritime forest overlay district. So overlay zoning is a zoning that sits over top of the base zoning. So the base zoning might tell you, your building setbacks, your height requirements, the uses allowed. Overlay zoning is typically used to apply an extra layer to that. So in this instance, they have a maritime forest overlay that adds additional vegetation restriction. The benefit of that is you can target that without affecting that base zoning district. So if there are certain areas that have specific land use or environmental qualities, you can use that overlay district to say, we want to preserve these while still maintaining that base zoning district. And in that zoning district, they have specific standards for not disturbing areas within the front, rear, or side yard setbacks, and then explicitly say where those things can be circumnavigated. I think some of the discussion last month was an ongoing discussion about what qualifies to allow somebody to remove a tree. So they've kind of laid that out pretty clearly here, in my opinion, and also shown that in certain instances you can, limit the areas of disturbance to within the setbacks. So just wanted to illustrate that point there. Caswell Beach actually has an authorization for tree removal, which I thought was interesting. I know there's been some discussion about, what do we do post and what type of permits are required. So they've kind of laid out those standards. Once again, looking at relation to site construction activities, driveways, patios, paved areas. So once again, I think one thing that the board and our adopted plans back this up should consider is, let's talk about what these things are that we can exempt, so that there's clear guidance for staff when we make these types of determinations. Southport also has a tree preservation ordinance that's specifically for vacant lots of 1 and 2 family residential uses, typically what we see on the portions of the island that are being developed. So that's why we pulled that one specifically. Also had a much broader much more lenient requirement for tree preservation. We have 1 tree per, I believe it's 1,450 square feet of lot area. It works out to be something it works out to be something 10 trees per 6,600 square feet of lot. You know, these are 1 tree per 3,000, 2 trees per 6,500. So there are other considerations taken. In fact, just in the number of trees, I know there's been a lot of discussion about what the end canopy is going to look like. So there's some potential there if we look at different requirements for different styles of trees, you know, if we take into consideration, you know, canopy at full growth or something like that. I believe that there's some potential there. And then finally, I did pull from my last jurisdiction. I worked in Leland for a while. This ordinance I wanted to introduce because it has a couple of considerations that this board can take. This is from the what Leland calls the flex code. Flex code is a form-based zoning code, meaning that it's highly specific about where things are on the lot and less specific about what the use of those things are. So you will very tightly regulate where a building is placed, but you might allow multiple commercial, residential uses within that. It has different zonings that relate to different styles of use. This T3 zoning is suburban, which actually pretty well equates to our R6 standards, which is a lot of the island right now. And they require that certain trees be preserved or replanted in a landscape area that is in the front layer of that development. So you have your front setback, a certain portion of that has to be counted as landscape, and you have to plant a number of trees per square footage that's in that. So it kind of balances out the distance and the width to make sure that there's an even planting requirement through there. So that takes really, like I said, the form of the development into account versus the, you know, more blanket traditional, as long as you have the minimum on the lot, wherever it is on the lot, that's fine. This says no, those have to be placed in certain areas. And like I said, I pulled it because it was familiar. It gets to that form that I think we've discussed some, and it relates to a style of development that we actually see here existing on the island. So we wanted to pull that too. As far as planning best practices go, the American Planning Association does have a report on this very thing. You know, how do we plan? They call it an urban forest, but the American Planning Association, every town is a different level of urban. So they give you some guidance there. I won't go over this point by point. One thing that in reviewing our ordinances and reviewing this best practices that we have here, that I'd recommend this board consider going forward is we have a lot of requirements of anybody who wants to build a house. We don't have many incentives to help people preserve these trees. And I'll show an example of in your packet of what somebody who wants to build on a lot ends up putting in. You know, and you've heard this many times, so I won't go over in huge detail. You know, by the time you put in a driveway, all the parking on a 55-foot wide lot, you know, the actual building footprint, stormwater, you know, these things all coincide. So finding ways to not just require that these things be done, but also incentivize people to do things that we want them to do, like planting trees close to the street, can be something for this board to consider doing. There are some incentives in the ordinance right now. I don't know that they've ever been taken advantage of.
They're not meaningful.
Yeah.
They're
I
in
believe,
name only.
yeah, there's a qualification for live oaks, I believe, that could maybe be counted as an incentive for that specific species. There's a pretty nominal 25% flexible building setback for tree preservation. And there's a ability to waive the development permit fee. That development permit fee is $100. If I tell you that you have to qualify for that, you have to preserve these trees, but that ends up costing you $2,000 of site redesign and work, well, that's not going to give you much carrot to chew on there. So definitely something to think about, ways we can incentivize this. You can you know, do things like setbacks. You can do things like flexible parking standards, you know, additional things like that can make a difference for people who are trying to actually preserve the trees on the lot. You know, you could also go with a bonus credit similar to like we do with live oaks, where, you could even say something like a large canopy tree with X amount of canopy cover counts towards, a larger section of your planting, so you're not having to go back and plant, 4 trees, because we've got one big, large existing canopy tree. So that was a thought that I had just coming from some of these best practice standards. Moving on through the memo that you have, I did attach, and I'm sorry for how this turned out when it got converted into a PDF. Hopefully your agenda packets, I think the printed packets that came out larger. I just asked the zoning staff to just give me one recent single home family site plan that they've got. As you can see, a large portion of that is taken up by driveway, parking, building requirements. By the time you add in stormwater, there's not a whole lot of room on the site. So we do want to make sure that whatever we do, we balance those needs that we want. There's been a lot of discussion about what parking requirements should be, because there is, issues with that on the island as well. So we want to make sure that we're balancing all of these forces appropriately to get to where we want. So that was just by way of illustration to show you what a typical single-family home in the R6 could look like under our current development standards. And then finally, our adopted plans considerations. The plan has some pretty compelling items that it recommends. Once again, incentivizing the preservation of trees, defining those essential site improvements that we've talked about so much. Right now, it's been a point of discussion between, I believe, the chair and Steve had some discussion about that last month as well.
Yes, we did.
So there's some things to chew on in our ordinance, and some things that this board can use to make a recommendation and say that this is consistent with our adopted plans. As a planner, one of the things I will do before you is advocate for your adopted plans, and it is the adopted plans that we have, and whether or not they need to be updated. The plans that we have are the plans that are adopted, and that is the policy of the town, and it's my job to present those to you. And certainly this board can differ. You don't have to agree with the comprehensive plan to do something. But as a staff member, that's my role in this, is to say, here's what your plan says, and whether or not we believe that's consistent or inconsistent. So there's definitely some things we can pull from to have consistency here. That being said, what would we need going forward from here?
You need some direction.
We need some direction, that's right. We need some direction as far as the consensus about what we want to see. I know there was some discussion about a number of trees within the front setback for certain lot widths. Certainly a workable solution there. It gets to some of the benefits that the gentleman was expounding on in his email. If we get some clear direction, staff would then loop in the Environmental Advisory Committee. We just had a meeting this morning, get their feedback on what the planning board has a consensus on. If everybody feels great about the direction we're going, then we'd have something for you to chew on and make a recommendation on.
Thank you, Matt.
Sure.
I think from what we're hearing out in the community, and from our discussion last month, the most important thing in all of this is to, and we've got that incentive in the front, like you said, kept coming, pulled up from a long time ago. It's more of a feel-good, look, we did something. Totally useless. I think we realized that last year, but got to a certain point and wanted to carry forward what we had accomplished to that point and come back to that at some time. So I think that's the one piece of it that we're all in agreement on, and coincides with what the community's asking for in terms of requiring those front yard trees. And in looking through, some of the examples that you provided us, and looking at that in the context of, we talked about different lots, something on a per square footage in the front, front yard seems like that would, address both of those issues. So that would be my number one thing. And I'll just go ahead and jump out in front and say that, but let's hear from everybody. Anita, what are your thoughts on what's before us?
I definitely want to do what we can to preserve our tree canopy. I like seeing it when we drive over the bridge. I like the idea of the square footage, and I appreciate the examples that you provided, along with the, what are they, I want to say APA, but is that the right, yeah, of those recommendations and considerations, so.
Lee?
I'd like to back up a little bit and get into the mechanics of what we might be able to do, because I think there's a lot of consensus on our board anyway as to what we want as the end result. But should we be starting from scratch, or should we be modifying the existing ordinance? I'd like some guidance there, or at least we need to think about it. And for what it's worth, I did take the old ordinance and tried to tighten it up. It's a little bit long. I don't know if you want me to go through this now or not, but basically it takes the old ordinance and looks at problems like no trees in the front yard and the size of the caliper and stuff like that. I could just turn this in to be attached to the minutes.
You want to just read it to us since we don't have a copy? Or could we make a quick copy?
We can make copies.
Yeah, so we're just making a copy of that.
Okay, well, you can come
We'll
back
continue
to
the
it then.
discussion.
Yeah.
I'll pass it down to her.
Yeah.
I can pass it to her. Oh, you're coming. Oh, yep.
Yeah, I think some of the, because our focus, when we went through everything, and the revisions that we made last year after, what was it, 6 months or so, was looked at the ordinance as a whole. Personally, I don't think starting from scratch is where we are, but I think because I think we see a lot from the process we've gone through and seeing how that's working out, that next phase. So that, I'm afraid if we start from scratch, we're going to get all kinds of surprises again that we have to go through. We kind of know what we've got now, where the places are that we're not seeing the results that we
The
want.
overlay idea is a little bit, is maybe a way of starting from scratch, but not starting from scratch. I personally, I kind of like that idea, but maybe we could have some discussion on that idea of using an overlay.
In some parts.
And in some parts, yeah.
Yeah, because we've always tried to make the distinction between there's been some distinction made between the beach area and the rest of town. And so that's where an overlay might come into play at some point. Also, the focus has been to, and we all get it, you've got to reforest and so forth as well, but preserving existing vegetation, because it takes a long, long time to grow a canopy tree, and we do still have a lot of them left. That perhaps the incentive to preserve that, and particularly in the front, if there's a certain caliper that we're trying to get in the front, well, if you've already got a 4 or a 6-inch caliber tree in the front, but you're requiring, if you cut it down or if it's not there, you've got to put one there, that gets a little bit more expensive than $100. And then, so maybe we can do some incentives in that, incentivize what we're requiring in terms of caliper or type of tree in the front yard, so that there's more of an incentive to preserve what may already be existing there and do what we're looking for in terms of that streetscape. We talk a lot about streetscape and trees and whatnot in the commercial district, but I think we need to be what the community is telling us and what we're realizing is that we need to be more mindful of that streetscape in our residential areas. And that streetscape, the key to that, I think for most people, is that tree presence. Does that make sense? Okay. Natasha?
It's no secret that preserving the tree canopy is high on my list. As a lifelong resident of Oak Island, driving around and seeing lots clear cut is sickening, to say the least. So, I do support, trying to do the right thing. I think that we've definitely worked on this, and I do agree. I think we can do better. Placing trees in the front yard does kind of keep the character of Oak Island. And, we had one problem we had was people or builders clear cutting, and I hate blaming it on them. They're not all, but lots were being clear cut and then planting palm trees back and getting credit for. So we eliminated that, and with doing that, I was thinking that hopefully we would be able to preserve, some of what was in front. So, but I do think we're on the right track with saying, let's at least have a percentage up front. I think we can probably, you brought up Southport's tree ordinance, and they're around 10 per 6,600. Is that what you said?
That's what we are.
That's what we.
They are lower.
Oh, they're lower.
Lower.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I don't think we want to go lower yet.
No, definitely not lower.
Yes.
So,
And the nature of the trees in Southport with all those big live oaks and whatnot, yeah, one or two of those worked.
right.
We don't have that
We don't
here.
have that. And, and the dynamic is a little bit different here on Oak Island, believe it or not. We're a barrier, so the trees grow a little bit different here than they do in Southport. They're closer together, and I think that's kind of one thing we get hung up on when we say, oh, you have to save 6 trees, and I think people are thinking, oh, well, they have to be separated out 5 or 10 feet to survive. Well, they don't.
Yeah.
Trees at Oak Island grow right upon each other, and we don't have a problem with that.
They seem to do very well
So
with that.
They do. They do.
But if you try to plant trees to recreate that, it might not do so.
Yeah, and so for me, if when my husband's a builder, I hound him to death about things, and I go out on lots now and I help him mark areas. So yes, what you have here, it does present a challenge. I understand, but we can work around it. The main thing I hear out of my husband and some of the other builders is stormwater. What really bothers them is when we have to plow through existing vegetation and disturb the roots and everything to put stormwater retention materials in the ground, and it's like we're not getting any credit whatsoever for the vegetation that's on the lot, and we're not really taking into account not all areas of the island hold water. I mean, the sand does a great job. Most of the houses I've lived in on the island didn't even have gutters or gutter retention systems. It pours rain and within 10 minutes it's gone. So I think there are kind of a few things like that we can take into account. But
I will say that, and I think I said this last month, part of the issue with trying to take into account trees for stormwater is once you get that CO, you can cut all those trees, and trying to keep up with all your trees tied to your stormwater.
So on the back end,
I think that's just way beyond.
And I know that does complicate it, Tara.
And plus, now that doesn't count in terms of what the regulations are.
Right.
Yeah, it makes sense
yeah.
to us, we get that.
And it's easy to stand on a lot and look around, and if you have any sense or care at all, you can preserve things, but to reduce it in writing on paper is just not easy. So I don't know if that comment helps or not, but we can do better. I will tell you all that. I think putting trees, in the front is good. I would be in favor of adding a few more to the requirement, because if you go by and look, it just doesn't seem like enough. It doesn't reflect really the natural landscape prior to development, in my opinion.
A lot of the older homes do, but the building was different then, the
Right,
size of the houses
yes.
and everything else. And we tried to capture something in the changes we made last year that would address that redevelopment. And I want, if we're looking at this again now, I would like to have another set of eyes on this, Matt, in terms of, is the piece that we put in there for redevelopment really going to preserve those existing canopies in the way we were thinking it would, rather than, is there something we need to clarify, strengthen, what have you, make sure that our interpretation is all the same, so that when that starts occurring, you see bits and pieces of it now. Most people now are trying to, refurbish what's there, because quite frankly, it's made out of better material than you get now. But anyway, whatever the reasons are, but that's not going to always be the case.
Yeah, and keep it as simple as we can.
Try to keep it simple, try to keep
You
it
know,
objective,
when these
easy to
guys-
implement. I mean, all those kind of things,
Right.
we don't want to put staff in a position of, and, just like I think it's mentioned in some of the guidelines that Matt has shared with us from APA, it's got to be consistent, it's got to be objective, or you get into all kind of legal issues and you end up with nothing. And we don't want to do that. So, yeah.
And I'll chime in with that too. One thing that, sharing that site plan with you, one thing we want to be cognizant of is if we implement something and we all of a sudden have many people coming to my office asking about applying for a variance or an appeal at the Board of Adjustment, we know we've
Done too much.
That's right. We haven't had that yet. Nobody's come to me and asked for a tree variance or anything like that. But I do want to keep that in mind, like you just mentioned. We don't want to overstep any legal. I know I don't have to say this. The state has languished on a bill for a couple of years, looking at saying if you don't have a local act, you get nothing. So we have the authorization now. Let's do what we need to do, but with the mindset that some things always aren't as favorable as an environment as we would like sometimes. So.
Yeah.
And I think for most builders, it's not their intention to do what's happening. It's really not. But really, if we had, just thinking outside the box, a volunteer organization that would be possibly willing to come in when the development permit's turned in, and then maybe ask the builder, would you like to have the volunteer service come out and mark your trees and help you guys out in every way we could? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I mean, you need to have somebody that's, I don't think the volunteer, I hear what you're saying.
yeah,
But, there would need to be somebody that does that as a
or could the town
professional
provide the
job.
service? I don't know.
Well, we had an arborist position at one time that was relatively short-lived. Budgetary reasons, like everything else. And he actually wrote the ordinance that we adopted in 2009, I think it was. But I look back at that now and look at what we've got and look at what's happened in between. And of course, building was next to nothing then because we were in that recession, which was mostly a real estate recession, for us anyway. But when things started heating up again, and that was pretty much gutted, but even if it hadn't been, you look back at that and what has happened, and that wasn't it either. So it's still, a work in progress. But, a lot of and we didn't have anything in place years ago when a lot of these houses were built that preserved all these trees, and that was dependent on the property owner wanted that and made sure that,
Well, it's because they were
valued that.
custom built.
Yeah.
The problem, custom-built houses don't have a problem of no trees because the owner is out there making sure the trees get saved.
A few of them do because some
few-
owners don't
a few
want any
do.
trees. They don't want to deal with the, maintenance.
And a lot of the new houses fill the lot that there's hardly any room
There's
left.
not any room left.
They go right to the setback.
Yeah, so, all those things are in play. One of the things, now that you mentioned about the parking, and I don't know if that's an overlay thing or not, but, we had to go to the habitable space calculation because we couldn't do the bedrooms anymore. And I thought that was a good solution and compromise on that, but, and I think there was if memory serves me right, staff actually proposed to split that between, do that in the beach area and do something more traditional in the wooded area. In some instances, not so much when, depending on how your piling structure set up and how many driveways you have under the house and that kind of thing, or whether you've got storage on one side. But requiring more parking that we were getting along fine without in the wooded area is taking out some trees or some space where you could put some trees. And so that's another piece of the puzzle that maybe we need to try to pull along and look at. And, that work may have already been done. You may just, find where that was proposed before and see how that, and maybe a simple tweak. But now granted, there are more Airbnbs and more weekly rentals in the wooded area now than there were then. How that impacts, it's hard to say.
And that's a wicked problem, and it's interrelated. You might have, I know there's also problems with parking for the beach accesses. Are people, on the wooded side, staying there and then getting in the car and driving to the beach instead of maybe riding a bicycle or walking, just because the infrastructure is not there. I know those are all interrelated. So philosophically, a lot of jurisdictions are moving away from minimum parking just because you're creating spaces for cars and not for human beings. Right. But there's obviously unique challenges to this area that we have to take into account. So I would agree that finding a way to balance that, we have two different zonings. We have most of the beachfront is R7 and most of the wooded is some form of R6. So I think that we talked about an overlay. I think that there's some
We could still
possibilities there at least.
We might still do the habitable space piece of it, but it might be less in the wooded area so that you're not, as you say, taking up things that for human space that really don't need to be taken up. So if you take a look at that in the interim, the other thing, and I think Steve mentioned this a couple of months ago, the fact that we have any cap on impervious surface was quite an achievement in this town in fairly recent development. It's still too high. And I think there were some members of the planning board at that time who thought 35% was a more effective for this, all things considered.
We did a study on
45.
that. And if we went down to 35, very few houses would be affected,
Yeah.
that they would be non-conforming.
I know there are quite a few that, well, it
Oh,
depends on where you are.
Yeah.
But in any event, I just,
I think we're gonna
trying to
require
look at all the
gravel drive.
pieces, but still coming back, even just something as relatively simple as requiring a certain number of trees based on the square footage in the front yard. That is impacted by the parking we've talked about, that is impacted by the impervious surface position, that we're talking about. In the former Long Beach, the front yard setback used to be 30 feet, and most of what's out there is 30 feet because that's what it's built to. But the new houses are building to the 25 standard. So, that's another 5 feet we eliminated for that kind of streetscape front use. Don't know whether we'd even take a look at going back to that or not. It was always, I think it was always 25 in Yopon. And I won't bore you with the reasons why it was changed. But anyway, so anything else, Natasha?
I think that's,
You good?
yeah.
Yeah. Tim?
I got a client without power that I'm not gonna be able to stay probably much longer. I got to go chase that down.
Okay.
But we used to
We'll
have.
still have a quorum, so.
Do what now?
We'll still have a quorum,
Okay.
but we don't, we want you here, but we understand.
Yeah, it's one of those things. We used to have a thing, I was an operator out at the Brunswick plant, and we used to have this term that we used called an operator workaround. When we were trying to perform an evolution on something, we wrote procedures. We were the ones that wrote our procedures to run the power plant. And when we'd get out in the field and we'd be doing something, it was verbatim compliance. You had to go by that procedure. So if there was something in that procedure that you had to, a step you had to perform that you realized was not something that was crucial to what you were trying to do, then we had new operators that would come in and they would try to do it by that procedure and realize that I really can't get where I'm trying to go from here using that step. So for a while, it was kind of like they would be in a dilemma of, well, what do we do? It's in the procedure. I got to go with the procedure. And the management finally came down and said, listen, guys, y'all write the procedures. Just stop what you're doing. Get a temporary revision approved by the control room, by our senior reactor operator up there, and then move forward. But you control the process. You just make sure you remember you control the process. And Natasha stole some of my thunder there, but it was good because I'll reiterate what you said. I've talked to builders that tell me that they are cutting down trees that will use more water than the stuff that we're putting in the ground, that we're required to put in the ground. From what I understand, I'm from Raleigh. I'm from the Piedmont area originally. Been down here 41 years, so I've seen all this development happening. Because it's a clay soil up there, when you have a hard rain, it doesn't go in, it goes off, it goes wherever. And then you see a lot of muddy ponds. You'll go out right by and see ponds that are just like a mud hole. And they stay like that all the time, when there's rain. So, and you mentioned Yopon Beach. Yopon has got the older homes, if you know the way the island was developed. You got the Caswell Beach people, and then you had the golf course, and then the Yopon, and then the mobile home section. And the advantage of showing property, Natasha and I are both with RE/MAX, so we get to show property everywhere. And when you go to Yopon Beach and you see the mature oak trees and you realize all these trees are still there and they didn't have all these recommendations and these requirements that we somehow have to put out there to try to keep Oak Island, the Long Beach part of Oak Island, looking like Yopon does. So when nobody had to do it, it was done somehow. So my mom, and I've mentioned this before, my mom, bless her heart, she retired from the General Assembly. And if that's where we need to go to get somebody to look at the difference in our environment and how it's affected by rainfall and the western part or the middle part of the state, and see if somebody can lift this requirement where we're having to do this, that would remove one obstacle that we're dealing with when people, that way they couldn't justify cutting down the trees in the backyard because you got to put all this junk in the ground to hold the water off the downspouts from the rainfall. Yeah. So I think we've got like a workaround. We're trying to work around mandates that have been handed to us that probably were put in place for an area that doesn't have what we have when it comes to rainfall. When it rains, there was puddles in my front yard, but in the morning, but by lunchtime they're gone. Yeah. So.
And we have a new full-time stormwater administrator that I'm sure has probably already done some things, made some changes in terms of what, I think we got rid of the peanuts,
Let's go to Raleigh.
yeah,
Let's
I'd
go.
like to,
I love walking in that legislative building.
Matt, if you would have a conversation with him and with David and think about maybe he can come and help us understand what we've got, what we can do about it, and you know, what we need to do and work in conjunction with council on.
I already wrote that note down to.
Good
His name's
man.
Rick Patterson, and you're right. He's really great. He's done a lot. He's got a lot of environmental experience.
Yeah.
He was in the EAC meeting this morning and said we were talking about this very issue, and he said that he had convinced someone to relocate their driveway in the front yard and do like a spiral driveway to avoid a tree. So, you know, we've got the folks out there advocating for it, for sure. He's extremely knowledgeable. As you mentioned, he got rid of he's removed the easy flow, which is like the peanuts that you're talking about, which is a stormwater method. He started to require pervious materials for the driveways in the right of way the town owns, so he's making good progress. And I can definitely get with him and see if he'd be willing to come talk you guys through some of these issues and what we're doing to try to manage it. Also talk to him about bioretention, which is a stormwater methodology that uses natural plantings and ponds to retain instead of formal structures. So you might have, they call them like rain gardens or smart yards and things like that. And I believe when I talked to him about it briefly, he mentioned that we had already had a couple of people that he had, gotten to go that direction, which has other environmental benefits. It was a thought I had as we were talking is, that could be, an incentive if we say we see the benefit of having these types of bioretention, if you go that way, is there some incentive for the tree credit? Those are things that we can definitely explore.
Well, you said you marked trees for John. How many trees in the middle of the backyard, if you didn't have to put the stormwater stuff in there, how many trees could you save? How many?
I mean, if we have one that we're in the process of building on now. The lot is a little bit deeper than others, but we have about 55 trees on the lot as a whole. I can't tell you the exact number in the backyard, but I mean, it would be significant. Yeah. And the footprint of the area that we have to disturb for stormwater, we have lost, even though we're doing our level best to try to run the tractor right beside or away from the oak trees, and I'm saying oaks because most of the time they are, to save them, they end up dying because we've disturbed the roots. We still leave them there and try to give them a chance, but we do lose some because of that.
And another thing to consider is if we're fighting this, if this is a state required thing, if there's a strength in numbers, then get Carolina Beach, all these other beaches that may still have we're kind of a standalone. When you go over Ocean Isle, you see a canopy of rooftops.
Yeah, most of what because Ocean Isle doesn't have, the way the intercoastal was cut through, they're wooded areas on the mainland.
Right.
Okay, so we are unique in a lot of respects, but still there are, I'm sure, mainland areas that are trying.
They're probably fighting the same thing
as well. So yeah.
I would say it.
But yeah, I think hearing from Rick would help.
Yeah,
help us think about some things and help make sure that we're educated and we're working in concert with whatever else is going on with those types of things.
And Dara, you just said educating. Some of the people, and Lee mentioned, well, if it's a custom home, the homeowners are trying to save trees.
Yeah.
No, I wish that was the case, but oftentimes it's not. You would think it would be, but people who, not all of them, but moving from different areas, they don't always realize the importance of the trees, the function and things like that. They look at them as a nuisance and they don't realize the benefits of the trees. And so maybe we could work on educating our citizens, send out something with the water bill, you know, and just kind of plant the seeds with them on the importance, so we can kind of pass the word
And the
around.
Environmental Advisory Committee would be the educational arm
Yeah,
of that.
they
So-
would.
So,
Yeah,
I know they pay attention to what we're talking about, and, you know, and certainly Matt has input into that as well, with the EDO and all that stuff. So yeah, that would be a task that they might consider taking up. You know, they've done a lot of good work in some other areas and can't do it all at once. But,
Right.
maybe that'll be something they'll consider.
Well, I'll tell you something else. There's a conversation that's held that I've heard because you don't, because you and John have got what y'all got and you're 100% with him. But I'm on camera. Can y'all hear me in the back?
Speak into the microphone, Tim. We want to make.
I have heard other people, I just say other people broadly, tell homeowners that this is a requirement, you've got to have this in order to get the CO. We've got to do this in order to get the CO, but once you own the home, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And then you hear chainsaws start, the day after closing.
and that is the case, Tim. And I realize that's a challenge, and there are other things that homeowners do after the fact. They'll unhook their gutter system
Stuff, yeah.
from the stormwater thing, okay? So they do that. We can't regulate everything they do.
You
And I
can't
know
tell
that's-
people
I know
what
that's
to
not
do,
what
but-
you're getting at.
No, but
I've seen houses with that bypass
Yeah.
built in
Yeah.
when people moved in.
Because they know it's not necessary.
yeah.
It's not.
But meanwhile, you've
Most
already lost the
places.
trees.
Yeah, you've
So
already
the
lost the
incentive to keep the trees that we've got, to go
You've
back to
lost the
that.
trees that would
Yeah.
really help the rain thing.
Yes.
But,
For something that they're gonna disconnect in because because you can't require the annual inspections to keep that thing in there, just like we're not requiring, permits for cutting down a tree in your yard.
That would
And
be
that,
incredibly
and
difficult.
that is largely, that's not gonna fly on this zone. I can
Yeah,
tell you that
it's
right now.
not.
It's just not.
But what I have found, that I'll say, is we work to try to save as many trees as we can. We build the house, the homeowner moves in. They have, so now they have more of an uphill battle to get rid of those trees, which to me, in some cases, is a
Sometimes they
good
might-
thing,
they might learn
so.
They might appreciate that. They might, have to, they may think about, at least think twice about it. But I know some, I've heard, alternatively, I've heard some people who have bought spec houses who said, I wish they had saved the tree and trying to now replant, do something with it, but realizing for it to look like what they'd really like for it to look like, they're not gonna be around to see it.
I know.
Well, somewhere in the state, probably Western, gotta be Western, because that's where all the clay and stuff is. Somewhere in the state, somebody brought this before the legislature, that we need something to control this stormwater runoff that we're having. So if somebody approached them with the concept and they felt like they needed to make a ruling for those people, then we need to approach them with the concept to make them understand that we need them to do something to help us save our environment down here.
The state stormwater rule history on that level has things really kicked in high gear, I guess, about 2004-ish, maybe. It has a long and controversial history.
Well, let's just stir it up
Stir it up
some
some more?
Yeah.
All right, let's stir it up.
Let's
then.
start
I
with
mean
the
that, yeah, we
I
can
think
do
we've
this.
probably overloaded Matt with things to
We control the process.
to look
You
at,
advise on
starting
controlling the
starting
process.
to
Right, you tell me when you want somebody to go to
some
Raleigh.
things to
Okay.
start looking at, some putting together some language to bring back to us next month. And I would suggest, Lee, if it's okay with you, that you take this list that you provide and just take that into consideration as you're putting all this together.
So let me make sure I've at least got One, we want to invite the stormwater administrator to come in and discuss just the program in general to help the board understand that. Am I understanding that direction clearly? It sounds like as far as our discussion for potential ordinance modifications, we want to focus on some type of tree per square footage in the front yard, perhaps. Is that the direction we'd like to go? All right, so I'll work on those things. I'll work on making sure that we're trying to have some type of balance and scale with the type of lots that we have here on the island to get to where we want to go. One thing that I had thought of just in passing, similar to this, you mentioned streetscapes that we talk about for commercial. We have that, I believe it's called a street yard requirement in our ordinance that bases it on the linear feet of street frontage and then allows a certain number. It might be worthwhile, and I can bring that before you as well, an option for,
Sure.
here's what it looks like if you do square footage, here's what you look like if we do, X number of trees in the front yard per linear foot
Yeah,
on,
that sounds
on
good.
the front, and let you kind of weigh those. And I'll update the EAC at their meeting next month about those discussions and get some of their input as well.
I just have one more comment. And we dealt with this a while ago, but giving someone double tree credits for planting a live oak, I think probably at the time, maybe that sounded like the right thing to try to encourage them to plant live oaks. But I really don't think that's probably the best. I don't think double tree credits for planting one tree is a good solution for what we're doing here. I wish we had more of,
If there's more tree credits for live oaks that are existing of a certain size,
Yes, some
that would
incentive to
probably be
keep 'em.
better. But just, yeah, and a lot of people get confused. They look at the code and, I mean, we know this, but they look at the code and they say, well, that table, you can just clear cut and put the table, but they don't get that that table is only if there is you cannot save the existing trees for that. So maybe a
That's
focus
right,
on the existing trees, particularly the live oaks, giving something for some more incentive to save the live oak in terms of credits. At least take a look at what that might look like.
Would the board like me to take a crack at, I know we talked about defining what an essential site improvement is. Would you prefer something? Would you like that
The
as
thing that
well?
we did was something with a permit, but apparently some of those permits that are out there that we don't really know about or understand are getting in the way of what we're trying to accomplish with that. And so, yes, I'm still not sure what an open yard permit is, but I want to get rid of it because to me, a yard can have a tree.
Right.
Okay.
I'll look at some examples and try to get some clarifying language for that too. Some of the examples I gave you, were very clear about not only what those things are, but also the distance from them. And some of them even vary. Say you got to be X from the house, but you can be X from the driveway, stormwater, things like that.
And just like we were talking about, what grows naturally here, you may have 3 or 4 trees very close together.
Yeah.
By the same token, and yeah, anybody can give one example of something bad happening, but if you ride around this town and look at places that have the houses that have preserved trees and measure how far those trees are from the house, they're,
No difference.
and everything is fine. So I have absolutely no interest in getting into that.
Okay, will do.
Just, I don't know how the rest of you guys feel, but that's just, with the lot size we have, you're gonna have something, 4 corners, and that's about it. Again, I understand the premise, and in certain soils, blah, 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 that may work just fine, but that's not an issue here, and you can prove it on the ground. Just saying, even though some of these ordinances are local, relatively local ordinances.
That being said, it sounds like next month will be another discussion month for this. Is the consensus of the board that you would not like to see that option, or would you prefer to see that and debate the merits of it at a later date?
Feel free to bring us language on things that you think that we can, yeah, I want us to see some actual ordinance language next month.
Will do.
And yeah, we will, we have, I guess, when we started this process November a year before last, Jake had outlined some things and we had some discussion and started very minimally with some, but, after that first initial discussion like we've had here today with you, we had language the next time that we had it on the agenda, we had to kick it out a month because there were so many other things coming through with citizen applications that we had to deal with. And then the 160D stuff, we had special meetings for that. And we are perfectly willing to have an extra meeting in a month to deal with some of these things. I think we've certainly done it in the past. We've had a little bit of a lull in the last few months, so maybe we're a bit rested and we're ready to work with you.
That works for me.
So bring us something, us something in July to work on.
Sounds great.
Okay. All right. Everybody good? Okay. And thank you for all that discussion and your input, Matt. Okay, next on the agenda is what did I do with my agenda? Text amendments to table of uses for airport hangars and airport terminals in CLD zoning district. Matt?
Get up because I've got a presentation for this one since we're
Okay,
asking
good.
for some action on this. This is excuse me. Well, this is a proposed text amendment to section 6.5 and article 7 of the Unified Development Ordinance, the UDO. Bear with me just a moment here. Lost my screen. That's fun. Well, I'll just go through this. So this proposed text amendment would affect those two sections of the ordinance. In August of 2021, Town Council amended the table of permitted uses to allow some airport-related uses in both the airport district and the CLD, commercial low-density zoning districts. Those amendments did not include allowing airport hangars accessory in the CLD zoning district, despite portions of the airport property containing this. So you have parts of the airport that are zoned CLD where hangars are not permitted. And it also did not create a use category for airport terminals. And I'll go through why that's problematic here in just a second. This zoning map amendment is the map amendment that went along with that text amendment. A portion of the CLD property that was owned by the airport was rezoned to airport district. You can see that outlined in pink on this screen here. It's the gray area in the corner. They also rezoned a couple of portions of the airport district into CLD here and here. And so there's property that's owned by the airport that has both zoning districts on them. That being said, you also have in your agenda packet an aerial map that shows the parcels that would be affected by this change that have two zoning districts. This corner right here, if you are looking at your screen in front of you, if you can see my mouse, that's where the terminal is. That's in the CLD zoning district. There's also several structures out there that could be certainly defined as a hangar. So those are there. Those are in the CLD zoning district. It was brought to my attention that, and this, I'll be frank, this process was started before me coming onto the town. So it was brought to my attention and presented to me as that these uses should have been permitted. We permit airport maintenance facility in the CLD. That could very easily be construed to be a structure like a hangar, similar to what you would see where airports are stored and repaired.
Right, and I guess the best practice is if you have something kind of close and you really have a need, then that sort of gets interpreted as, yeah, a hangar fits that, so you can put a hangar out there.
It could be, yes, ma'am.
Could be.
That's right.
But we want to be more precise than that.
Sure, that's you're exactly right. We want to be more precise than that. So as you can see, some of these uses that staff has proposed allowing with certain stipulations in the CLD are currently in the CLD. So this is essentially, I call it ordinance maintenance. You know, there's certain things that we got to take a look at every now and then and make sure that what we're doing is what we want to do. So staff has proposed an amendment to the table of permitted uses that would permit airport hangars accessory. That's how it's listed in the table of permitted uses currently in the CLD zoning district with supplemental regulations. In addition, it would establish the use of airport terminals, which we don't have in our table of ordinances at all right now, in that table of permitted uses. And we permit that use in the airport district as well as the CLD zoning district with supplemental regulations. Those supplemental regulations would require the parcel that you're using. So if you have a parcel and you have some CLD zoning on it and you say, Matt, I want to have an airport accessory hangar on it. The stipulation would be that that parcel also has to have airport zoning district on it. So it would only apply to these parcels that have split zoning. So in order for these uses to be expanded beyond the parcels that I showed you before, there would have to be some type of zoning text amendment to, or zoning map amendment to expand that airport district. You couldn't just say, Matt, I got a CLD on the other side of town, I want to put a hangar in it. Sorry, you're out of luck on that one. So the comprehensive plan has some language about the importance of the airport facility. I won't go into detail about this, but you know, it does drive some economic development for the town. The future land use map contains a mix of office institutional and low density residential land uses. So what does that mean really? Because we don't have office institutional zoning in the town. Your adopted plan is a guiding document. It contains general language about how the town wants to build in the future. And you typically have very broad future land use categories within that because you don't want to stipulate and say, this zoning is appropriate here, this zoning is appropriate here, because that's a zoning map. And so the purpose of a future land use map is to provide some very general guidance about how the town can grow in the future, what type of broad uses might be applicable in certain areas. The office and institutional land use category was overlaid over top of the airport, you know, showing that use was obviously what they foresaw for that office and institutional land use category. Low density residential was frankly put in kind of as a placeholder. It even says that to that effect in the future land use plan that large areas of that low density residential, we just don't know what we want there yet. So when something comes along, you know, we can take that into consideration as it comes. And a large portion of this low density residential that's adjacent to the airport is zoned CLD. So it seems that the town's made a conscious decision about what in this instance that low density residential should look like. And here's a copy of that future land use map. I apologize for this map, mainly because this is not in a GIS format that I'm able to manipulate. I've got an intern working diligently on that right now to see if we can make that happen so that we'll be able to focus in on some of these areas and get better guidance.
That would be nice to have.
I agree 100%. That was one of the first things I said. I was like, oh, we got to get that mapped.
I think I'll since I've interrupted you with that.
Sure.
You know, to me, it may have been a poor choice. I'll just say it this way. I think it was a poor choice of word choice for using as that broad category the office institutional, which is also a district, which we don't have anywhere.
Yeah.
I
don't disagree with you. And
anyway,
we can,
as long as we understand what it intended to mean, we can maybe live with it.
And I do want to
fix it.
Talk about things, about future things when we get to the next item on the agenda. Some visions I have for hopefully moving this town forward. So I can get my mouse back. The area we're talking about, the airport's this blue area, where, as I mentioned, the adopted plan applies to the office institutional land use category. And the additional land that was zoned for the airport is over here, and that, once again, is the low-density residential that was kind of said, well, when something comes in, let's look at what it is and make a determination as to whether that's a viable land use. So that being said, staff is, in this instance, recommending, sorry for the typo on your screen there. That's right, sorry, I read it wrong. So we're making a recommendation to you, and the motion that we've included in your agenda packet is here on the screen. That's to recommend town council approve the proposed text amendment, finding that it's consistent with the comprehensive land use plan, as well as reasonable in the public interest. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have. I'll also point out that our chair reached out to me prior to this and pointed out a couple of typos in the land use plan, or in the table of permitted uses that were distributed with the agenda packet. So I updated those. You have an updated table in front of you. We're working on making sure that all of our public-facing information is up to date, because that helps me make sure that what I've got in front of you. I'd actually used the online ordinance, which didn't reflect the changes from last time, and had to be
Right,
corrected. That
that ended,
I've been created
in
twice now.
July, and this was approved in August, I think.
Yeah,
or
so
whatever,
I
yeah.
apologize for the confusion on that.
And then the county map doesn't, that's more than,
Working on that too. But yeah, I appreciate your pointing that out to me so we can make sure it's right. And so I'm sure you've all worked on these things before. You have a couple of options in front of you when someone asks for a recommendation. You can agree with staff's recommendation. You can modify what we've put in front of you. If there's a concern about the language, you can certainly do that. You could recommend denial. You could give me some specific feedback and ask me to come back next month with some changes. One thing I do want to point out is that anytime someone comes before you for a recommendation, you technically have 30 days to make that recommendation before they can go to town council. That's not to say that they will or that town council won't bring it back before you, but we want to make sure that we're moving things along appropriately. That's essentially 2 meetings. So, even if you can't come to a decision at the first one, let's give some quality feedback, and then they can come back with something in front of you.
anybody have any questions for Matt before I?
For me, as far as allowing more storage areas as in an airport hangar, that seems reasonable, because I know our population has increased and some people do have private airplanes and things. When we say airport terminal, that concerns me just a tad, and it might be because I may not completely understand. I think in saying this, I would probably reflect most of the people here. What we don't want to do is create a situation where we can expand and have, try to have a large terminal competing with Myrtle Beach and Wilmington.
Sure.
And, for me, my goal is to preserve the quality of life that we have here. And creating a huge airport, across the way is not doing that. So I want to make sure that whatever changes we make now, 5, 10, 20 years down the road, we don't look back and say, oh, we didn't realize that this was going to come as a result, So that's my main concern here.
I'm with you on that.
Our airport is extremely important. I think it's great. It serves a purpose. It was a lifeline for us during Florence. There's no secret about that. And there are probably other security reasons that we need an airport, being that we're near the nuclear plant in Sunny Point. So I realize that it's important, but I just want to make sure, as far as, everyday use and things like that, we're not possibly opening up a can of worms that, so.
And my response to that would be that the terminal's there.
The terminal.
The terminal for the airport is
But-
there in the CLD district.
Yeah, we're just making the terminal that we've got
allowed.
In compliance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And
so
so
this
that-
would not authorize anything other than permitting a terminal on those parcels that we have. So
All that stuff would go through the FAA and
that's correct.
Right.
Yeah, so
and whatnot. And,
They're gonna be limited by the size of the airstrip.
That's
too,
exactly
what can
right.
Come and go, so.
yes, sir.
But I'm with you. I've got Waldo Pepper, I wanna see it stay,
Yeah.
biplanes and, I
Right.
wanna see it stay a small town.
And not to be narrow-minded.
No,
but,
you're
you know,
right.
It's easy to drive 30, 45 minutes to Wilmington
Oh,
or
I
Myrtle
agree.
Beach, and then we get to drive back here and,
And-
have
and-
peace and quiet.
And the
So,
intention of this is not to allow some type of expansion of a terminal to that type. It's to, it's to realize that we have uses that are already in the CLD that really probably should have been addressed at the last text amendment and zoning district, and were not. And so we want to make sure that what's out there now is permitted appropriately.
He came a year ago, didn't he? Came and was
No,
asking
but
about.
remember Jake told us then that, I think that was one of the last things that came before us when Jake's last meeting. He said,
Right.
yeah, we were just trying to clean all this up and make sure we had everything we needed so you wouldn't have to deal with this anymore.
Well, unfortunately,
Jake, you
we're still
missed
doing
one,
it.
buddy.
so.
Well, he was, and wasn't he also asking for something that he would like to put some they got the little bait and tackle stores. He
Right,
was wanting to be
right.
able to put some businesses there to bring more
Exactly.
people. So,
That was some of
So you
the
amended the
zoning
table
stuff,
this
and then to
time.
get
Yeah, and we
the,
allowed
get the
that.
uses in the
Yeah,
table.
yeah.
we did.
And so
Yeah, just, you don't want to see that big terminal with the.
But by changing and allowing different uses there, they don't have to come and ask us for things. It's already in there and permitted. Is that so if we say, yes, airport terminals are included in here.
We're
then-
playing catch up right now.
just playing catch up,
think.
that's all we're doing.
Just being specific, the airport district permits an airport. You could very easily make the case that a portion of an airport is a terminal.
Right.
So in that case, if they were asking for it in the airport district, we could permit it. But this is allowing that extension to be on these particular CLD parcels as well. And they still have to meet all the development regulations of the town. So any setback requirements, anything specifically in those districts, they still got to meet those. So that there are some provisions in there to prevent what you're talking about. They have to do stormwater stuff. We talked about that a lot today. If they're going to expand a building, once again, they have to meet every development regulation we have. This would just allow those things that are already there to be permitted. And if they came in right now and said, Matt, we're going to pull renovation permits for our terminal, I'd have to have a real hard think about whether they could do that because it's not listed in the table of permitted uses as being allowed in the CLD, even though it's in the
So is this
CLD.
this is more on Oak Island for not keeping, for not
Well,
being.
They could have asked for it as well. you know
Right,
what
so
I mean?
yeah, I think we're trying to
I
catch up.
do understand that they could potentially, if they wanted to, increase the size of that terminal, is it considered a non-conforming structure? Because it's not,
We'd have to take a look at that then. I haven't
Yeah,
done
so-
that deep of an analysis, but the potential's there, yeah.
yeah.
Without putting myself in a position on record.
Well, the new guy said.
We're just, most of us are just average citizens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So we
get,
don't want to make the mistake of voting for something
Sure.
that's gonna negatively impact us down the road.
yeah,
So we're relying on you guys for the protection,
yeah,
so.
absolutely. I appreciate your confidence, hopefully.
Natasha,
Yes,
it's okay.
it is okay.
It is. I'm not the boogeyman.
Anybody else?
No, I'm good, but I'm glad you brought that up, because
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, the designation, the extension of the runway, the designation of the jetport, that was a big change.
It was.
But there is nothing in their 20-year, 40-year plan to do anything other than make maximum positive use of that for the area, not to make it morph into something else. They're
Right.
perfectly we need general aviation airports like that. And
We do,
that's what
and
it's,
I
and
realize
that's what it
that.
will continue to be.
I just want to make sure we're not
Nope.
softly chiseling away and then,
No, that,
No, we're just doing something we really should have done years ago.
probably so.
But when the the old quote-unquote terminal over on Long Beach Road, we didn't have terminal in the code then, it was in the airport district. Again, we didn't have all those specific uses listed. That's been something that in the UDA over the years and most recently in the UDA process, we had maybe 3 dozen uses in our old land use code. Now we've got 300 because you're trying to get that specificity so that and so yes, we put terminals in airports, but we're not talking about terminal like
American Airlines.
RDU.
Right, that's what I don't want to see
Right,
here.
right.
It-
And
We should not allow that.
if we want to come back and add a definition of what we mean by airport terminal, I mean, I don't know that that's really, it's not a commercial airport, it's a general aviation airport, and putting this in isn't gonna change that.
And I agree with you, Dare, on that. Right now, it's not, but there are probably some that would like to see,
But that's not gonna be something that we change.
Okay. So
We don't
doing
have
this
that-
won't
we don't have that
push us in
we
that
don't
direction.
have that authority.
Okay,
That is totally somebody else's authority.
Okay.
Completely out of our hands.
I wish they would start doing more air shows like they used to do
Yeah.
20 years ago. We used to have some pretty good air. Tell them that we'll work with them, but they need
I'll
to,
tell Howie after.
to
this meeting.
come
I'll
our way a
call
little bit here.
Talk to Howie.
I want to see some P-51s.
All right, good discussion, folks. So, the only thing that I had, and this is kind of, and I think that I included that in my comments to you, Matt, when I was looking at this I realized that the area of the airport district north of Airport Road can already have hangars in it. And the CLD, there's a little portion in that this would impact. And I don't know if we need to be telling the airport, well, you really shouldn't be building hangars across the road. Maybe they understand that because they don't have access to. It just seemed like, it just seemed to me like, and I understand in any general zoning district like that, special regulations, supplemental regulations or not, you're going to have some places that, maybe this exact use wouldn't be a good thing there, but nobody's ever going to do it anyway. So you don't get that involved in it. You have any out here?
That's a great point, first of all. I don't know that I have any prepared response to that. Like you mentioned, there's going to be instances where you have a zoning district that might allow a use that this is just not really going to be feasible to actually put in there. I'll say this particular amendment, I'll walk you through the history of what I understand how this came to us, is that the airport applied for a permit for a hangar beside the terminal where there's already several structures that could be potentially defined as hangars. It may be that they were defined as airplane maintenance facility, I think we allow in the CLD. Neither of these terms are defined, so it's, a matter of, looking in Webster's dictionary. And they applied for a permit for a hangar. They likely thought they were applying for a permit for the same things that are already out there. So it was brought to staff's attention that when a zoning review was done, that, oops, this looks like this, it could be construed that this is not permitted, despite the fact that they're already out there in that district. So the intention here is to cover that and make sure that the facility, the new maintenance hangar facility that they want to build beside the terminal that's similar to the ones that are there is permitted. And this was the cleanest way to do it, frankly.
And you thinking back on it, I mean, Howie talked about the last time that he was here before us, talked about, the hangars next to the terminal and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, maybe I'm just getting to whatever, but I just at
okay,
least
yeah.
wanted to mention it, bring it up and see if there was anything.
Sure.
Because if we're good with, yeah, I mean, the airport owns the property. I never did like split zoning, but that's a whole, you know, for me, I'd rather have it all zoned airport and have those uses pulled out of CLD that do what they want to do, but that's probably more involved in time than we need to spend on it, and with all the other things that we need to do, and they have their plan and business and whatnot, so they're not going to go out there, you know, put something inappropriate in an inappropriate place based on what they have.
And I agree with you philosophically, split zoning can be usually more troublesome than it's worth, in
Yeah,
my
that's
experience.
created a lot of the issues, I think. But the language that you've proposed is certainly sufficient to do what we're trying to do here today to clean this up. Okay. Anybody else? And your suggested motion, the finding that you have here is really what you've written also in the where is it? Yeah, in the consistency statement.
Yes,
And so what we usually do is just, you know, approve the proposed text amendment as presented and adopt the associated consistency statement.
Works for me.
That'll work for you. Do I have a motion to that effect?
I so move.
Okay, second?
No second.
Second, all in favor? It is unanimous, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back this up.
And so next on the agenda is the board report from Mr. Callahan from our May regular meeting, and Bob's not here, but yeah, at least go through and speak to us about your memo, even though he's not here, because I don't think, I know I haven't, Lisa, you haven't heard anything about, you know, why he's, might not, things happen, so. But yeah, let's at least go through that, yes, thank you.
You mentioned this there before I get into this, maybe wondering about the fence text amendment you heard last month, that applicant has to take some time to digest your input before coming back before you. Wanted to clean up that little item there too, just in case you were wondering where it's at. So as you well know, it was presented to you last month. Mr. Callahan presented a board report and asked for a response on some of these items. I've done my best with the limited amount of time I've had here to respond to some of those things. The first one would be to change permitted uses in the CB zoning district to no longer allow a restaurant with drive-through, including fast food and drive-through services. Right now, it's a special use permit process, meaning town council has a quasi-judicial hearing to determine whether or not to allow something like that to happen. To my knowledge, only
Right,
one.
and that doesn't come to us.
It does not, that's correct. To my knowledge.
It's okay with us.
I'm sure it is. To my knowledge, I was only able to determine that one had ever been granted for the OKI Scoop Shop and Donuts here right nearby. We have a couple of older buildings that predate our ordinance that have drive-throughs. Pelican Seafoods is one, and there's a couple other.
The old Hardee's, Old Mexican restaurant that hadn't been used in years. I wish somebody would open that up and quite frankly have a drive-through there.
So it's already a pretty restrictive process. Town council has to make certain findings of fact in a essentially a hearing that's very court-like to determine whether or not to grant one of those special use permits. Mr. Callahan's proposal would be to remove them entirely from the CB, so the ones that would exist would become non-conforming and no new ones would be able to be allowed at all. There are certainly, two sides to that argument is, drive-throughs, in car-related spaces can take away from walkability, my previous jurisdiction in our most walkable district did not allow drive-throughs at all. And it had several drive-throughs in there, so those people were gonna be sorely disappointed if they ever wanted to redevelop their property. So there's benefits and drawbacks certainly to making that type of change. That being said, we do have a contract with the COG, Council of Governments, to do a UDO audit. A part of that contract is to have up to 3 additional committee meetings to discuss UDO concerns and long-term land use and development goals. That could be an avenue to have those discussions about some of these other land uses we want to or don't want to crack open, because you typically want to align your uses with what those long-term goals might be. So this board could certainly, if there's a consensus, direct me to draft that change. Alternatively, we could keep that in mind as we start this UDO audit process and these ongoing discussions. An update on when that's supposed to happen. My last discussion with Wes was that Wes McLeod, when the COG is that we would start the staff portion of that next month. So we'd be compiling problem areas in the ordinance, figuring out, what's the best way to go forward doing that. So that's not, years down the road. Those are things that are going to be happening pretty quickly at this point.
Yeah, for me personally, I think and I certainly don't pretend to speak for Bob, but what I think I remember about some of the conversation last month, and for me personally, I can speak for myself most of the time, if I've had a cup of coffee when I get up in the morning. But I think something like this, most people associate drive-throughs with chains like McDonald's, like
Sure.
Chick-fil-A, like the list goes on. Now, quite frankly, I wouldn't mind having Chick-fil-A on the island, but that's neither here nor there. And our character is the mom and pop. And yeah, the donut place in Pelican, that's us. Yeah, the Hardee's wasn't, but then there was, somebody local who changed it.
Beverage Barn.
So, Beverage
Back
Barn.
in the day.
Back in the day. So trying to craft, and this certainly to me would be that larger look at in the UDO audit process. Trying to do, to the extent that you can, crafting, or maybe it already is, and we have our own limitations with the layout of the land, but to, as much as possible, encourage, protect, that, reserve, have that space that's for that mom and pop and this other stuff somewhere else. And so the extent that there's things that we can look at in this UDO audit process, that, the drive-through may just be one piece of that. There may be other things that we're just blinded to, but that's certainly something that was, and I guess looking at places like Charlotte and whatnot, but we, even some of the things that drive that in terms of, just sheer traffic flow, we're not Charlotte, we're not, but to be mindful of, okay, what are we and what do we need to put in place to protect that, big part of that small town atmosphere is that mom and pop businesses in our CB district.
And the special use right now, the restaurant doesn't have any supplemental, so they just have to meet the findings for special use. One of which is it's in harmony with the surrounding areas. So they, when town council considers that, talking about mom and pop, making sure the development kind of has that small town feel is something that they can take into consideration.
Yeah, some of the language in the supplemental and the special use could be the key to doing that. And You know, it was kind of mind-boggling to me looking at the UDO initially and how many special uses there are in there. Of course, we got rid of all the RU, MU stuff, CMU, RMU. But so many of them don't have anything other than your general findings of fact. And so in that UDO audit process, I think there's going to be some opportunity to either make it a permanent use or get some, to me, there's very little use in just having a laundry list of special use permits where you can't really identify what's special about what needs to be addressed in the use. And so I just throw that out there for you guys as you're starting that initial process to, on the UDO audit to look at. Anybody else have anything on this first one? Does that sound good to you? To just, let's look at
keep
that
in
one.
mind as we go
Keep that in mind as we're going forward
Yeah, and
with
from
the UDO audit.
yeah, I think Bob is trying to be proactive,
Sure.
you know, and so I do respect what he's saying, and I kind of see where he's coming from with, you know, some of those.
And I agree, you know, we have, you know, if we have a form of development and a type of thing we want to see in certain areas on the island, you know, we should have those discussions and figure those things out for sure. Yeah, I agree. And I will say, you know, once we get through this initial audit process, one thing that I think is often beneficial is having a regular code update roundup. You know, whether that's on a periodic schedule or whether that's, you know, as needed. But when we make little changes all the time, it's hard for anybody to catch up and know what's going on. If we do, you know, kind of a big sweep up of all the things that we know need to happen regularly, that can be much more orderly for everybody involved. So certainly there's going to be small things that might be like the airport thing was like, we really need to fix this because it's a potential problem, or, you know, health and safety issues that we want to go ahead and like, we got to fix this now. But it would be, I think, in our best interest to going forward, you know, bring your things to me and let's set up a time or a regular schedule of, hey, I know it's, you know, whatever month Matt's going to come and say, here's all the things that we've talked about. Here's staff's recommendation for repairing them.
Yeah, and I think we had kind of, in some ways, sort of started that process when we had the agenda item in December and came up with, you know, all this list of things. Well, here's some bits and pieces that different people have seen or brought to us that we want to just get this on a list and give it to council and say, okay, so, you know, tell us where you want to put the time and resources of your planning board and your staff to work on these things. And you know, the one thing that's come out of that is the UDO audit. If you haven't seen that list, I'm sure you've got it.
Sure, I've got it somewhere.
But you know, December may be a good time to do that in a regular sort of way, depending on where we are with, you know, everything else.
You know, so we'll have this audit, which will probably take some time just because it's been a long time since any real ordinance maintenance has been done, and there's probably a laundry list of items that we'll have to work through. I will go ahead and put out there that we will need to, at some point in the future, consider updating our future land use plan. Now, how quick that happens is an open question, but the state requires that we reasonably maintain that in order to have zoning authority. It's kind of an open question about what reasonably maintain means, but usually the guidance we've gotten from the School of Government as planners is typically 5 to 10 years. We're on the press, we're at or beyond that 5 years, I believe now. So that'll be something we want to look at going forward too.
Well, you know,
and so
just,
maybe
just the things like the RMU and the CMU, and that was a big part of, you know, all over the plan. Well, that's totally defunct now. So, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Item 2 in his board report, essentially discussed acquiring professional input on deliberations and decisions of the planning board. Since coming on as staff, it's been my finding that we don't really have a standardized, what I would call a technical review committee process, where new development applications are regularly sent out to a certain technical group of people, acquiring their feedback and then providing that feedback to the applicant as part of their review process. It's my intention to more closely formalize that. We do have a list of people in our ordinance that can be sought for staff comment. As I mentioned, it's my intention to do that certainly before anything that comes to this board, to have all of those comments received so that you know that, hey, DEQ looked at this for environmental wetlands issues or whatever it might be. You know, the utilities have looked at it, and the streets people have looked at it, DOT has looked at it, so that you're going to have more confidence when something comes before you, hopefully. He did mention a couple of impact statements and things like that. If it's a by right development project like a major subdivision or a site plan, unless you have discretion in the ordinance to ask for something, you may not be able to ask for that. And sometimes it's on a case-by-case basis. I've never worked closely with environmental impact studies or anything like that. I have had a lot of experience with traffic impact analysis. And if you'll permit me, I'll just speak on those a little bit. Traffic impact analysis are extremely powerful tools for local governments. So the state in our district of DOT, their threshold for a traffic impact analysis is 3,000 daily trips. So if your use that you're establishing doesn't generate 3,000 daily trips, no study is required. And that's a pretty large development. That's a few thousand single-family homes usually. So that's one thing. And even most local governments that are more restrictive use what's called a peak hour trip, because they're more concerned about the traffic in the morning and the evening. And they use 100 peak hours, which equates to about 100 single-family homes before they require any study. So usually those thresholds are pretty high for when you can even require a study. And having sat in several TIA discussions with traffic engineers, even at the lower local thresholds, a lot of times they'll say, we'll look at it, but there's not any real improvement that's going to come out of something like that. So that's a little bit about that. And the traffic impact studies don't tell you yes or no to allow or permit something to happen. They say this generates this level of traffic. Here's the things that the applicant should do to mitigate that traffic. So they'll present you with, a list of things to mitigate that. They're really great for moving cars. They are not really great for moving people. So you often get recommendations that are X long turn lane, widening roads, things like that. That doesn't necessarily contribute to walkability because the wider you make the road, the harder it is to get across it. I wanted to go get tacos for lunch the other day, and I had to go get my car because I didn't feel like playing Frogger out here with the traffic that was coming through. So even a short walk like that, if it's a long thing. We don't have any requirement in our ordinance for local developments or for builders to do it. If it's a DOT road, as I mentioned, if it trips that threshold, they'll require one. But if we do go down that road, I want to be very careful about where we apply those things, because if we have areas of town where we want more pedestrian bicycle oriented facilities, right, TIA, if it's not constructed appropriately, can be detrimental to that aspect.
Could be self-defeating. It would just.
Yeah. And there are ways to do it, but it's difficult to structure it in a way that, you only got so much land in the road. So we have to really be conscious about, what type of things we're
Well,
moving.
because particularly on the island, we want that walkability. Is there something, and again, this is in the audit process, is there something that we want to put in place, not a TIA, but is there a walkability in that? I mean, what do we have that we are requiring or not? This really taking a look at, okay, if we do this, then what does this do to our alternate modes of transportation other than how many cars we move in a day?
Yep, that would probably be one of those long-term development goal discussions that we have wrapped into that for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
And yeah, I will say that there have been periods in our history, even as the town of Oak Island, that we did a better job of technical review committee. So I'm delighted to hear you say that you're going to get that back up to speed where it needs to be.
and a lot of times applicants are happy for it, because if I send it to the stormwater guy and he says you need X, Y, Z permits, he knows as soon as zoning okays it, or planning board or town council, that he knows who he's got to go talk to. It can be beneficial for them too. Item 3 discusses stakeholder input. This kind of wraps into my discussion previously a little bit. In some instances, this planning board is charged with making a recommendation on a by right project. I definitely welcome and want stakeholder input in instances where we're looking at a project that says these are the standards, do they meet them, yes or no? If there's not any, consideration for stakeholder input in those ordinances, you're going to be put in a position to say, we hear your concerns, but this project meets all of our standards. That doesn't mean you can't take that stakeholder input and draft new ordinances to, address those concerns later, for sure. But I did just want to throw that out there. I know it's a difficult position to be put in, especially if you're at this board in front of the public and people are speaking on a concern. But it is something that this board is charged with. Item 4 asks for an update on the Williamson Tract. The Williamson Tract does have a planned unit development zoning that was approved by town council. Part of that planned unit development zoning is the negotiation in good faith of a development agreement. That development agreement negotiation is ongoing. Development agreements and the PUD zoning cannot strip away any other development regulation of the town, so they'll still have to come in for subdivision plats. Any required development regulation that we have would still need to be met if that development agreement is reached by town council. At the last meeting, they gave additional time to negotiate that, so those are ongoing. And then item 5 was a discussion of remote meeting requirements.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about that Tuesday night.
Yeah, Lisa addressed that at the last one. I don't know whether she wants to provide y'all with an update now or wait till
Could you
everybody's
just
here.
briefly update us on what council is doing with that process in terms of what they talked about Tuesday night?
Well, a couple of the elected officials had asked the attorney for a report. I wasn't aware that that was going to be part of the discussion Tuesday night, but so it'll be up to the council to decide if they want to implement a new policy for certain boards. The attorney had a long list of qualifications, who could call in, under what circumstances. It would be different for the planning board versus a different advisory committee. So I think there's a lot for them to look through. And again, we're just charged with carrying out the policy. The policy at this point is still that we're not doing remote participation.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think Brian clarified that that was not an option for council if we're not under a state of emergency.
That's correct.
Yeah, so.
That's all I have. Well, as I mentioned, we'll be looking to kick off the UDO audit and standardize some of these review processes going forward. So hopefully you'll see some of that work reflected in the future.
I'm really looking forward to that. We've been talking about that since last September. So.
We're gonna get it
Okay.
done.
All right, so anybody have anything else on that item? All right, the item that I added about discussion of the section 7.27 dwelling single family large. Of course, that is a special use permit. That was actually, and we've had, I guess, two one last spring and one this spring, two applications to build something under that special use permit. The ordinance that we have in the UDO is essentially word for word what was approved, recommended by the planning board and approved by council without public comment in October of 2016. So it is a carryover from, it's not just like the UDO created this. It's been there. Was not used for a long time because I think part of the thinking was, and how it was crafted, that most people would just build right under the line and not have to go through the process of conditional use or now special use permit process, because it can be rather a rather time-consuming, expensive process. And because of the nature, the requirements on the square footage in the lot, so forth and so on, I mean, it was basically crafted to thinking that it would be applied, could possibly be applied in the Kingsland area, down at the point. Clearly, most of the community and from comments made about the vote Tuesday night, most of the council members don't like doing this. And so the reason I brought this up for discussion is to see if there's any interest. It's not something that we have to provide for, as I understand it. Granted, CAMA will let you build in an inlet hazard area up to 5,000 square feet. And we just said you need to do a little bit extra if you want that extra 1,000 feet. There's nothing to keep us from saying you can't build a house, a single-family house that's greater than 3,999 square feet. But, build what you want on the mainland. And the other thing, the inlet hazard area, you have to have 15,000 square feet. I think if it was platted before 1981, most things down there do. Those 3 lots, those little orphan lots that are out in front, they were platted in 1952. They've got about 12,000, not quite 12,000 square feet, but they're perfectly fine as they are in terms of the size of the inlet hazard area. So having kind of said all that and brought in a little bit of history, is there any interest in asking Matt to come back to us with language that would strike this and do whatever other changes in the code that would make it clear that if you want to build something 4,000 square feet or more on a house on the island, you can't do it under any conditions anymore, anywhere.
I think that would eliminate a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just pondering pros and cons of that, thinking
Well, and-
both sides.
And I think certainly we get, if Matt can bring us back something, what that looks like,
Yeah.
then it gives us time to ponder, and it doesn't mean we go forward with it.
Yeah, I agree, because I can see limiting, but then
And
I think.
that's what we've got now.
Right.
I mean, when I was on Coastal Resource Advisory Commission, when we were talking about, what's the minimum, what's the maximum square footage in each zone and so forth. I mean, we worked really hard to try and get it limited to 3,000 square feet on a state level, because that's basically what we had, and that would have more than covered just about everything that was built in Brunswick County at the time. Of course, there are other places that the state has to consider, and there was discussion about doing something like that locally, but you're all too well familiar with what the legislature will do if you go too far with the thing. And so we've got what we've got. That was the cutoff. clearly, we could have done something else in 2016. But, you know, I think just to take a look at it again, okay, so if we cut there and just, you know, let that be that, and at least take a look at it.
Yep.
Lee, you
I think
good
it's
with
worth
that?
looking at.
Lee, you good with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Matt. It's consensus, if you will,
I just want to make one comment on that, and you'll probably think about it when you start looking at things, but, and I don't know that this exists, but let's just say somebody owned 5 or 6 lots in an area, and they said, I'm gonna combine these parcels, and I'd like to build a house that's 5,000 square feet. And then if we had that in place and we said, well, you can only go up to 3,999, then they might say, okay, well then I'm gonna build 5 houses. You know what I'm saying? So then we may end up shooting ourselves in the foot, but I don't know that that would ever come up.
We're
So
just-
a little tiny thought.
But you are limiting
just the aisle.
having a 4,000 square foot house that 20 people are staying in.
Yeah, and I agree with that. So,
So
Yeah,
for a
and-
safety
and-
standpoint.
Right, and we're just,
Yeah.
and we're just talking about
and
the
we're,
aisle.
we're up, yeah, I agree. I'm not, you know,
But yeah,
like
you
that.
make it, you make
we
it.
definitely have a problem to deal with.
It's an intensity,
They're on the verge of
Issue.
being commercial spaces.
Right.
there are
some of 'em.
commercial spaces, let's
Yeah.
be clear. But
Okay.
the state has been very clear also in telling us that we cannot treat them differently from single-family residential. But yeah, we can take off another 1,000 square feet. But again, there aren't that many places, there aren't that many lots where that happens. Basically, you know, and I'd be curious, because Oak Island Estates, or at least the part of it that's in town of Oak Island, around the golf course, is on R20, which should be, you know, 20,000 square. So they should, those lots over there should have enough, I think on this up to 5 is a, what do we call it, 13,000. You know, the only other place where there are lots that big are at the point. And they have to be platted that way because of the coastal rules. Now, again, that doesn't keep somebody from combining lots. That's right. And so you could get at it that way. But how much of that may or may not go on the island, or get some sense of how much of that is there already. And yeah, how many non-conforming, you know, there will be arguments about creating non-conforming uses. We created non-conforming uses when we put this in. But those are grandfathered, and it does not affect, you know, we have, you know, you can't build condos on the island anymore. But those, all the multifamily that we have is protected in the, you know, if it burned down today, they can build it right back, because you have to put those kinds of things in place. We did that to protect that investment. I mean, that's a reasonable thing to do. But so it's not one of those things where you're going to necessarily eliminate what's there. You can put, what's the term, Matt? They do it with the signs, some, we've said that before. You can change things so that you do eventually get rid of all of what you don't want. But that's not what we're trying to do with those types of uses. And so, yeah, but it just means you won't create situations where you have more of what you don't want.
Yeah, you can set up your nonconformities ordinances to, you know, allow certain things to be reestablished or continue, even if you prohibit new things going forward. We just have to make sure we're being specific about how we apply those things to make sure the language is appropriate.
Yeah.
I mean, zoning permits us to regulate the location, height, bulk. I mean, that's all the things that y'all are talking about, so.
But yeah, it is a, you know, there's a density side which comes into play on the multifamily, which is now a mainland issue now, and hopefully it will not be an island issue again. But 3 votes on council can change that. but the intensity piece of it is what I think everybody's struggling with now. And in that audit process, if there's anything you guys can come up with in terms of dealing with that intensity, I know, I feel like the options are probably limited, but give us what you got.
Sure, will do.
Okay. Board member reports, Anita?
I'm good.
Lee?
Nope.
Tasha? Tim? I just want to say again how much I appreciate how all of you are engaged and contribute in discussion. And Matt, I am delighted to have you on board. More than I can say. And Lisa, thank you for faithfully writing it all down.
I'm gonna keep trying. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Okay. And staff reports. Matt, you got anything else you want to share with us before we adjourn?
I do not, no ma'am.
All right, smart man. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Okay, all in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.